Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So, hello everyone. Today we are joined by Rosemary Holbrook. She is a certified yoga teacher, a Vedic astrologer. She has a degree in wellness, and she is working towards becoming certified in yoga therapy. So welcome, Rosemary. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you. And we're going to talk about mainly trauma, and she does a lot of research on trauma. So this is going to be very interesting for all of us, seeing we've come out of this very traumatic last year.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Everyone. Yeah. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So tell us about you. Tell us your story, your background, how you got to yoga and how it turned into yoga therapy for you.
Okay. So it's a long story, but I'll hit the high notes, the relevant points, I think. I first ever did yoga when I was in high school, when I was like 15 or 16 at a local gym. I just went to a yoga class because I thought it was exotic, which I think that's the story for a lot of people, right? They're like, oh, what is this cool, weird thing? I want to put my body in crazy shapes. That sounds cool. And so I did it and I fell in love with it.
Straight
when
away?
I was in high school. Yeah. And I just like, when I was like 17 years old, if I could have done anything, I wanted to become a yoga teacher then. But I was 17, so I was preparing to go off to college, and in my family, we have this thing where we get real degrees, quote unquote, for those that can't see my fingers on the podcast, air quotes, we get real degrees. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to get some kind of science degree, or like, I ended up deciding to become an engineer. So I went off to college and was like, maybe after I get my engineering degree and I have time later in life, I'll come back and become a yoga teacher. But meanwhile, I found myself in a series.
Engineering in what?
Yeah. It was industrial engineering. It was like systems engineering.
Oh, wow.
So I'm
Very
a super
different.
nerd.
Yes.
I'm good at math. Yeah. And I'm like so nerdy, which I think helped in the research piece. We'll get there later, but I'm like such a dork, and it's great. And I used to try to hide that part of myself, but now I'm all in touch with it. Good. And I let my my dork flag fly. So, but anyway, engineering was like, I'm good at it. Sure, but it was not a very authentic path for me. And so, and then also meanwhile, mixing in with not being super happy with that life choice. I was in a series of abusive relationships. And so during that time, I found myself addicted to drugs, pain pills first, and then eventually like IV opiates. And so I went down this really dark path. And so that's actually one of the things I focus on with my trauma research, is like, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to tell you all the war stories, because that's not the point. The point is what I learned from that and how I apply it, to my life now to become more resilient and try to share it with other folks. But
were you doing the drugs to cope with the situation?
So. Yeah. Totally. And it was kind of a situation where like I was dating this guy and he was in the military, and he like went through, I didn't start off just dating a drug addict. But he was doing good stuff in life, and then got addicted on his own accord. And then I got desensitized to it. And also I was super unhappy because he wasn't that good in a relationship due to, his own stuff, his own life stuff, childhood trauma, whatever. And then, so we just weren't good for each other. And I was miserable in engineering school. I was miserable in the relationship. And it was totally a coping mechanism for lack of other coping mechanisms. Right.
Yeah.
And I got desensitized to it through like, partying and whatever. And then you go
Yeah,
slowly
it just
down that
becomes
path and
acceptable.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's how it works. And then so here I am, find myself still in engineering school, very addicted to drugs, like strung out, and like, I mean, a junkie to the fullest extent. And I know some people are like, don't say that, you know, person first language, you know, that's a bad word, but I was that. And for a while, and so I
How
bounced
long
it
was
out
that? Years?
like 4 or 5 years.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
so you really know it. You also have
Yeah,
sympathy and
totally.
empathy for people. You know what it's like to
Yeah.
be there. Yeah.
Yeah, I have this interesting perspective in life too. I think I like I come from like a regular white family. I come from like some generational wealth, but I've also known homelessness and the struggle. I've known the struggle for sure.
The real, yeah.
Yeah. And then so I bounced in and out of rehab and do the things that you do when you're trying to get clean. But I was I went to a long-term rehab, and then I ended up leaving there and relapsing. And we hear this a lot where people have like chronic relapses. And I think that can be with anything, you know, not just opiate addiction. Yeah. You know, we go back into our behaviors that we try to.
It can be anything. It can be sugar.
Yeah.
It can be TV. It can be your screen. It can be, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or it can change to something else. But
alcohol.
So I was always wondering why, you know, why can't I stop? Like I wanted to stop forever. But I just kept relapsing, and it ultimately came down to a lack of coping skills. I went to this like long-term program and I totally didn't gain any coping skills from that. But when I came back, I ended up getting in some trouble. So I had to do this outpatient program that I wasn't like very happy about doing, but because it was an outpatient program, it was only like 3 hours a day, a few days a week. So I had like the rest of the week to do whatever. So I got a job. I had a job. I worked most of the time, but that's beside the point. I worked and I joined a gym again. And then there I started exercising again, and I started going back to yoga classes. And here's the magic, because I never relapsed again after that. And I always wondered why, like down the road, I was like, why? I was like, why was this outpatient program that seems like it wouldn't be as intensive as an inpatient? Why did that work better for me? And I think it was a combination of both. It wasn't just the yoga, because that's another thing that I'm like, I want to talk about scope of practice. And it's like yoga is magical and it does offer a lot of coping skills, but I was also getting counseling at the time. So I think it was the combination of the two, but I couldn't have, obviously just counseling didn't do it for me.
No, you need to have the
yeah,
bottoms up and the tops down.
Totally. The whole person wellness, which ultimately I found is what yoga therapy is, but this was way earlier in the story. It was just like gym class yoga, you know? And so it wasn't even, you know, I've studied extensively trauma-informed yoga since then, but at the time, these weren't trauma-informed yoga classes. They were just power yoga classes at the YMCA.
Yeah.
And so I was going to those, and I ended up staying clean. And so then I was like, why? I was like, why did this work? I know it was yoga, but I don't know why. And I want to find out why. So then I started down this path of like, why does yoga work as a powerful healing tool? And the nerd in me, the engineer in me wants to know like the science of those things, right? But so I wanted to study that more. And so what that looked like is I was in a position to choose to return to engineering school. But I had actually done that when I got out of the long-term rehab. I went right back the very next semester, and that was part of my relapse, I believe. Was I tried to go back to engineering school, and I was like, all right, third time's a charm of dropping out of engineering school. Like this isn't for me, clearly. What am I going to do instead? So I was like, I'm going to revitalize this old dream of becoming a yoga teacher. I'm like just working as a waitress at the time, you know, finished the outpatient program. I'm like, I got the rest of my life ahead of me. It's not engineering school. What's it going to be? And so I was like, well, to kill some time, I'll just go to a yoga teacher training. And Yeah. It was like, well, I figured it out, this is something that I want to do, but I still had this belief in, this deep-seated belief in my family. Yeah. That's not like a viable career, or that's not a real job. I'm dropping out of engineering school to be like a hippie. What a failure, right? From the perspective of my family, not my whole family. I had, like the important family members were very supportive, but I had a lot of pushback from some other also important family members, and they've since come around. I've proved to them that it's a viable
the nerd in you.
that it's a viable career option. It's a viable life path. I'm glad yoga and alternate, more holistic paths to health are kind of gaining some traction now, for sure.
In America, I don't know how strong it is in Europe. That's also one reason I'm doing this podcast. I really want people to realize the potential there.
Amazing.
Can I just ask, or this is also my conclusion, because I had a similar path to you. I was very young already in kind of screwed up relationships, like as boyfriends. And I think it comes down to many things, but also for me, I think that's what I've gotten out of my research. It's a lot to do with communication skills, emotional literacy, and learning to self-regulate your moods and your energy, the hormones, the physiology. So that's what I found that is so powerful about yoga, because if I did yoga every day, I would cruise through the day, whatever the circumstances. And if I didn't do yoga for 1, 2, 3 days, I would notice the difference in my mood, in my mental states, and how situations around me affected me. So that was very clear from very early on, because from the age of 15, I started practicing, and I was dealing with anxiety and depression from the age of about 12. So it helped me to regulate and smooth that out. But I just made sure I did it regular. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So for me, it's been very powerful, but going into yoga therapy has made me understand why and how.
Totally. And I think that was my path too. I was like, I know there's magic in this.
Yeah.
And I want to understand it. Like, why does it work? And we hear that story like constantly. Everybody, as soon as you become like a yoga person, spend any time in any yoga
tradition,
everybody is like, this healed me from just anything, whatever people go through in life.
I was hanging out with people who were
healing.
drug addicts, but I couldn't get addicted just because I had my yoga practice. That was my addiction. So
fair enough.
I did do all the drugs, but I just couldn't get addicted.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's also a good point. Makes me think about how I want to stress that I entered this path through my own addiction issues, but what I ended up finding was that the kind of common denominator is trauma. Rather, so this stuff that I've researched is applicable to kind of any kind of trauma. And I ended up, it was kind of a long path to find that, of course, but it started in my yoga teacher training. We had to do like a research project in that. And it was like a 10-month long one that I did. So we had to do this research project, and we could pick any focus we wanted to. And I had heard of Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger.
Yes.
And so I did a book report on that. And then from that kind of informed, for my yoga teacher training, that kind of informed the research project that I did. And I actually can't even remember at this point what I like titled the paper, but I remember that was like the beginning of it, where I was like doing all this research. I think I did Why Yoga Works for Addiction specifically then, but over time I've kind of refined that and done a lot more research and found that the common denominator piece that often leads to addiction or other maladaptive behaviors is trauma. And by trauma I mean psychological trauma, which could come from a physical trauma, you know, if you
Mm-hmm.
Google trauma, it usually brings up stuff like breaking your arm as a trauma, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what event happened when you broke your arm? Did it leave you feeling helpless? And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the piece that gets people, what makes people
Yeah.
traumatized.
Yeah. And trauma doesn't have to be big T. It can be small T's. I just
Totally add
every
up over
day,
time.
yeah, every
Yeah.
day rejection or dismissal at home or at school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that makes us less
Chronic
able to
stress.
cope. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Totally. And so
Mm.
that's what I found. Yeah, that's what yoga works for, that kind of stuff. And then I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to find out why.
And
And
how?
we're still digging. Yeah, there's
Okay.
still lots of answers for that one. But one thing that I've found through my research, actually, so to go along with the story format, I did
Yeah.
this yoga teacher training,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm like, okay, you know, now what? Did the yoga teacher training, now what? Right? I'm going to be a yoga teacher, but I still got to pay my bills, so I'm still working like a full-time job somewhere. I was actually working for myself at the time, but that's beside the point. I decided to go back to school because I was 1 year away from an engineering degree, and I was like, well, I shouldn't. A lot of
Just
people in
throw
my
it
life were
away.
like, you shouldn't let all your credits expire. Yeah, you
Mm.
should go ahead and get a degree.
Mm.
And I was like, all right, let me just find something that is not engineering, but seems like it would work for me. And I ended up, I had moved to another city from where I was doing all the using, where I grew up and stuff. And it turned in Asheville, North Carolina, where I live now. I just kind of looked at the local university, and they had this degree called health and wellness promotion. And I was like, perfect. That sounds perfectly like it would pair with yoga.
Mm.
And if not, like, whatever, I'll just do it, get it over with, and I'll have a degree. And right, because it is a good point. You know,
Yeah, at
I was
least it's
very close to having a
aligned.
degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
it turned out it could not have been any more perfect of a degree
Oh,
for
good.
me and what I wanted to do in my life. I got a lot of holistic health topics from that science perspective, from
Mm.
that Western like research perspective on topics like physical health, nutrition, mental health, exercise science. And I, you know, as a yoga teacher, I wanted to learn anatomy and physiology. And just a side plug for yoga teachers and yoga therapists, I love yoga people, but university people teach anatomy and physiology better. They just do. If you want to get a good handle on anatomy and physiology,
Yeah.
go to a community college or something and take a course, because I was so glad I did. So I learned all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff.
It's just scratching the surface in a yoga training or
Yeah,
even in a yoga therapy training. It's so
totally.
vast. As vast as
Yeah.
yoga is, so is physiology, so is
Mhm.
anatomy. Each one is just endless.
Yeah.
What you
And
can
there's all these fields, and I'm glad we have people that are specializing. But I'm also glad that we have yoga therapy, which the idea is kind of to be the person in somebody's healthcare regime that puts all the pieces together, right?
Yeah.
And kind of like, we might say, hey, this particular ailment might be better suited for a specialist, but it can save somebody from doing all that running around to specialists, and nobody's putting the whole puzzle together. I think that's one beautiful thing
That's
of
a
yoga
good
therapy.
description. That's a really good description. Yeah. The mediator between many fields.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Because I'm also pretty conscious of scope of practice, because especially with something like addiction and trauma, usually, like I was saying, you know, I wasn't just going to yoga, I was going to counseling too. And that's actually good segue into the research I did, or was trying to do. And in my undergraduate degree, the health and wellness promotion that I ended up going for, through like a synchronous turn of events, the research advisor I found, she was one of my professors, and she's like this incredible person, also a yoga teacher, but a professor.
Great.
And so she ended up being the perfect research advisor for me. And the study that I devised was on yoga for trauma. But it turns out that, so I did all this I took a research methods class, and I did all this background research, like a literature review, they're called, where you just look up all the research there is on whatever topic, and you write like a 20-page paper about all that research and what it means, all taken together, and then what the holes in it are, like what the next steps need to be, what the next questions to be answered.
Yes.
And so that's what I did.
Well, this was a course you had to do for this research?
Yeah. I didn't have to. I just did.
No, I know
you
wanted
research methods.
Okay, I want to do that.
Yeah. It was called research methods, and I cannot recommend enough something like that, because research from the Western perspective is like a whole thing. So that's one thing I actually learned in that class. There's this concept called epistemology, which basically comes down to ways of knowing. And it's kind of trippy to think about, like, how do you know what you know?
Inference.
Why do you believe what you believe? Right. And in Western society, especially in the United States, we place a lot of value on research. But then there are whole camps of people that are like, well, who funds that research? And then they get all conspiracy theory-ish about that. And so I think there's a middle path here. I think there's a lot of value in scientific research, but I think it also, when not taken with more Eastern ways of knowing, like experiential learning, especially through the practice of yoga. That's a lot of what yoga emphasizes, is embodied understanding, understanding things from your own embodied experience, and pass down knowledge. You know, a part of me, especially when I was early switching from the engineering background to the yoga world, I was like, well, I want to prove all this stuff with science, because I don't believe it unless it's like scientifically proven.
Yeah, and other people won't.
Somewhere along the line, I was like, okay, there needs to be a healthy mix of both. Not everything needs to be
proven,
explained by a research paper, I think. But I think it's valuable that there are people doing that. But I think it's also valuable that there are people out there that are like,
well, I think
people put that into real
use,
tangible things in their body.
I think the thing with research, like you say, it's really important, and especially important for our Western minds. We want to believe in something first, we have to have it proven. But at the same time, we can get so narrow-minded that we lose sight of what we're doing. And that's where the Eastern philosophy and way of thinking comes in. It brings it back. We zoom out again and make it relative and adaptive, applicable to living, to daily life. Because we can keep researching and researching and researching, but if we're not using it in everyday life, it has no function.
Absolutely. And so that's ultimately kind of why I personally decided to go down the path of yoga therapy rather than academia, because I think I'm glad people are doing academia, but obviously I had proved to myself through the whole engineering school stunt that wasn't really my path. Academia, like, I'm not meant to be in I'm smart. Yes. I'm not saying I'm dumb or bad at school.
Right, but even if you don't go to school, you could still be very smart.
But that was not the path for me. But I have this family background that's like, I don't know, a lot of people in my family get advanced degrees, so that's kind of the expectation in some ways. So that's kind of ingrained in me that there's something wrong with me for not going that path. And so I think, like, I can't be the only one, right, that feels that way. So I want to put a little validation on both paths, I guess. Is like, some people are meant for academia, and I'm glad we have those people. I like to interview them on my podcast sometimes, you know, and then I'm glad we have people that are yoga therapists and alternative health practitioners that are helping us put it into practice in our lives, you know, taking that knowledge and making it real, right?
Applicable. Yes. Well, so, I think your issue with this having to have a degree is also just the fact that our culture, it doesn't matter which angle you look at, whatever is important to your family, your tribe, your culture, it's always not good enough. Right. Even if you had your degree, it'd still not be good enough in your mind, in the psyche.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not because anyone said so. It's just the way we interpret it. Okay. So before we were talking, Rosemary was telling me that, she had her research ready last year for her degree and that it couldn't go through. So do you want to tell us about that? Because that sounds very interesting and what it did become.
So I did that previous literature review I was talking about. And then in a following, to get the degree, you could either do research or an internship. And I just decided to do the research because I had taken the research methods class and I was like, I really want to do this. I got excited about it. I never saw myself as like a research person. Yeah, but I got really excited about this topic and I was like, I could actually like do this study and I think it would be beneficial to the world. So here's the study, what it was supposed to be. It was about yoga for trauma. And through all this background research I did, the whole 20-page paper that I wrote that I'm like happy to share with anybody if they care. I don't know. But but it's pretty jargony. It's very academic. But what I found was basically that, and what I hypothesized was that trauma, psychological trauma, going through big T or little t trauma disconnects people from their bodies. They get scared of their emotions and their physical sensations, which makes sense, especially if you've read like Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger. That's kind of the whole crux of his work, is that it's primal. And when you get traumatized, you get disconnected from those things. You get stuck in loops of hypervigilance, of fight or flight mode. And so your body becomes a scary place to be. You can't trust your emotions because your emotions evoke these fight or flight systems in your body, which is uncomfortable. And then, so then you disconnect yourself from those things, from the physical sensations, which Peter Levine calls the felt sense, but the academic jargony word for it is interoception, your body awareness, and you disconnect yourself from your emotions because those things make you feel unsafe. And it's a coping mechanism to disconnect yourself from those things. And so I hypothesize, that's what I found from all the background research. And so I hypothesize that yoga reconnects you to your emotional and physical awareness. I know that experientially. I know that from my own experience with yoga. I know that from talking to people and what people say to me and overwhelmingly what I hear, but I wanted to test it with the research. So I had planned this intervention study where I was going to collect people from counseling practices, because again, I'm pretty like sensitive to the scope of practice. I was like, if I'm going to find traumatized people and try to see if yoga works for them, I want them to be in counseling. So I was like, one of the inclusion criteria is that these people would stay with their counselor or therapist through
the process. Can I just ask, how did you approach these people?
So I approached the counselors and asked them to ask their clients because I put together, it was really easy to put together a list of local practitioners.
That's a good idea.
I did. Or I say easy, it was a lot of hours of work, but it was tedious, but it wasn't hard, to put together that list. But so I did that, and I was putting together, I was like gathering the participants, and what we were going to do is I was going to teach the yoga, because by this time I was a 200-hour, RYT Yoga Alliance. And I had also taken a couple different like 30-hour trainings in trauma-informed yoga. Yeah. So I was feeling pretty qualified at the time through my own life experience and trainings, to be the one to teach the classes, which, other people, you could, if you wanted to do a study like this, you could hire somebody. But anyway, I was going to teach them myself, and it was going to be like 8 weeks of classes, 8. And so we were going to put 2 groups, and there was going to be a control group that only went to they kept going to everybody keeps going to their counselor, but the control group, they only go to counseling. And they get asked the same questionnaires at the beginning, middle, and end that the intervention group does. And the intervention group continues going to their practitioner and also answers the same questionnaires, but they get 8 weeks of trauma-informed yoga classes.
Wow, so good. I'm going to do the same. This sounds amazing. Yes, wonderful.
And then, so this was January of 2020 that I was putting all that, and we were like, okay, in July is when we're going to do the intervention study, because I was also in school at the time, and I was like, it'll be great if it's after the semester. I don't have a lot going on in the summer. Like, I'll have the time to like really do it well and stuff, for all these reasons. And then by March, April, it started to become clear that an in-person intervention was not on the table at all for 2020. And this kind of sensitive work is just not something that you do
online
over Zoom. Yeah, it just not like that. Just wasn't And
community is also a big part of it. Being together.
Yeah, totally.
Group. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we ended up, I still had to do the study to graduate, and I had gotten a grant for it. So I had to do something. Wow. So, which I'm happy to elaborate on if other people want to find out how they can do some research. We can talk about that.
Yes.
But so I had to do something. So I ended up just collecting some participants still and just having them answer the questionnaires just once. And then, so we got some inconclusive data from that, which is a bummer, but I did learn, all of that stuff from the background research. And I think there's really something to that that hypothesis that yoga facilitates the big jargony words are interoception and alexithymia, but basically
what's alexithymia?
That's emotional awareness. So interoception is body awareness and alexithymia is an emotional awareness. And so we do know for sure, based on past research, that trauma disconnects people from those things.
From both those, yes.
But I haven't proven yet. So, and there are also several studies that prove that yoga works for trauma, especially a lot out of Bessel van der Kolk's organization.
Yes.
He does a lot of that stuff, or has done. The Body Keeps the Score, another like foundational book about this that really shaped, a lot of the stuff I've learned.
Yeah, it's a really great book.
Yeah. And so we know yoga works for trauma, and we know trauma disconnects people from those things. I just haven't had the chance yet to prove that they're what in research is called mediating variables. They would be, if I can prove this with the intervention study, then we'd be able to say, well, now we know that the reason that yoga works for trauma is because it connects you to your body and emotional awareness. But I haven't proved that on paper yet, but I think I'm like pretty sold on the idea.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Hopefully the work that I've been doing on my book, it's come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
It's all about body awareness and emotional awareness and feeling that within yourself and learning to feel safe with it. Also understanding what the emotion actually means rather than being afraid of it, and learning to work with it to self-regulate yourself. And eventually it's not self-regulation, but it's self-agency, because you understand what is actually being asked. Yes. Oh, so wonderful. And when you want to do this research again, how many people are you going to include in the study if for this to be a proof to the scientific world? How many people do you need?
So as many as I can. That's always the idea, right? As many as possible, right? I mean, I reached out to literally hundreds of practitioners.
Wow.
And the idea is that they
gosh,
have at least several clients each, maybe
more.
More than that. Maybe some of them are practices that have
no wonder it was tedious.
Clients, but so I put it all together, and so I still have that list, and I also have built some relationships. So it's like, all wasn't lost. built some relationships out of that and have some people that are definitely willing to go forward and be there when I do go forward with it. So anyway,
Good.
so like I graduated and all and still got my degree, but and now I still have this relationship with who was my research advisor, and we're planning
to do it.
probably next year, honestly, at this point, kind of go
Yeah.
ahead with the same timeline just next year
Wow.
to
Great.
carry out the study again.
Yeah.
So
Can I just ask how open were these practitioners to you? Was there a lot of
some of them I didn't even hear back from.
Okay.
You know, and this was through email. I collected a lot of email addresses and I just emailed them. And so this is also like, it was an ethics board, you know, research has to be ethical. So I had to get the whole process approved by an ethics board. So I had like a template email that I sent them that had been approved by the ethics board.
Wow.
And so I sent them this template email that was like, this is the study. This is what we're hoping to do. Basically the same thing I introduced to y'all earlier. Like, this is what I think. This is what I need from you. Would you? And so the idea was that with the client, the practitioners, I also included flyers that they could put up in their office, which then nobody was in office. But you know, I was making all this stuff in like January of last year. But I, you know, so now it's all ready to go. If I do it again, they can put up flyers. And then so the idea is the clients, that takes some like fear for the clients out of it, because they just tell their clients about it, and then the clients don't have to sign up through their practitioner. So I don't know who their practitioner was. They just go to the website and sign up. And they don't have to tell their practitioner that they signed up. Their practitioner doesn't know who did it or not, right? Unless they talk to them about it, which is fine if they want to, but they don't have to. So that takes some of the piece out of it. But then anyway, so we ended up you need like at least 30 people. Okay. Yeah. 30 is like kind of the bare minimum, but you want hundreds. Ideally you want hundreds. The more people you have, the more valid the results are. Yeah. But so I was trying to do it locally, and Nashville's not a huge city. But anyway, and it's just like everything got off last year was just a traumatizing year for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think everyone to some degree. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see if I'm able to carry it out again. You know, I'm
you will, but like you say,
that way. Yeah, like I'll do it eventually. Which is
I would love
right?
I would love to read your article, so I will put a link in the show notes.
Sure. All of
I'd
be happy to send it.
Yes. Yeah. So tell us a little about, okay, if you were going to do the research, or you are going to do the research, what are essential basics for the trauma informed yoga? What do you really focus on to make people feel safe?
Yeah, so it comes down to facilitating that body awareness and facilitating a sense of safety. That sense of safety is huge. And actually, in fact, my research advisor, that was like kind of her research was on psychological safety, which is, so that's not my area of expertise, but I'm fascinated by the topic. But from a lens of yoga, it's mostly about, so from trauma-informed yoga, it's like, you know, a lot of times you go to a yoga class and they're like, close your eyes and meditate, and they tell you what to do. And so we learn in trauma-informed yoga trainings that certain breath practices can create more anxiety for people. They can be triggers for sure. Being told to close your eyes, being told to relax, those things can absolutely be triggering for people. So everything is invitational, but that's another piece that makes it hard for the research, because the ethics board wants things to be laid out, cut and dry, scripted almost, which is fine. You know, we can make an invitational script, basically. It's just a lot of work. But the idea is invitational language, saying things like, when you feel ready, and if this works for you, or, kind of try it and see type language, instead of saying things like the full extent of the pose, because what is a full pose anyway, right? Like the way into a quote unquote full pose is also a pose, right? So so there's an inherent power dynamic between teacher and student, and so a big piece of trauma-informed yoga is kind of leveling that power dynamic and empowering people to be their own guide. But a lot of people, they don't feel safe being their own guide, or even so. I teach now. I teach power yoga classes at the Y because I love power yoga, and like shouts to earlier me, right?
Yeah.
Like that was
I think
a
lot of people with trauma, this is my own experience and what I've seen with people who have addictions or who tend towards these kind of lifestyles, they just lack a lot of self-confidence because we don't feel safe in our body. So any of these strong power or Ashtanga power yoga, it gives confidence and it makes our body feel safe because we are in power of our body. No one else is. So that's why it's a good segue. It's a good way into
absolutely
softening, first strengthening. Yeah.
But I think that's a place where when I go to power yoga classes, sometimes I often hear language like the full extent of the pose.
But that's
and
ego.
A lot of emphasis placed on what I call party trick poses. And so trauma-informed yoga is taking a lot of that out. So is therapeutic yoga, right? Like that's yoga therapy. It's not power yoga and yoga therapy aren't usually like in a yoga therapy session. We're not hardly ever going to give somebody a power yoga sequence.
No, sometimes, but you do want to strengthen
where they
them.
Are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you might want to start with a more active sequence for a person that has a hard time slowing down, right? Or something like that. But it's not quite the same as power yoga. And also we see a lot of people that go to power yoga a lot and they're like, that's a safe place because it is so hard to slow down. It is so hard to get quiet with the self, right? But this is what I've found also is that a lot of I studied all this stuff through like a very, very vulnerable populations are what I was studying. But I think this is applicable to anybody. Like, and this is the thing I learned in some of the trauma-informed teacher trainings I've done is that a very large percent of the population has been through some kind of traumatic event. And if not, things like chronic stress from being, say high up in a corporate job or, having all these work and family obligations or whatever it is, everybody gets stressed out. And just being in that chronic state of stress has the same implications on the body of that constant fight or flight mode that disconnects you from your body because it doesn't feel safe there when you're always in fight or flight mode. Yeah. So that's the idea is grounding people down, a lot of grounding, a lot of mostly just facilitating awareness and with the lens of like do what feels safe, and then the more you practice that the more you feel safe in your body. Yeah. Well, and that's another thing too is talking about triggers. I don't think the goal ever, especially from a lens of addiction, is to avoid triggers. It's to learn to feel safe
in them,
with them. Yeah. When you feel it's to learn specifically what happens. It's to not turn away. It's to turn towards what happens in your body and mind when you do feel a trigger. It's get really intimate with what physiologically happens for you, and then changing the story by choosing something different, which can be mostly, honestly, it's so simple, just using your breath, just extending your exhales to calm the nervous system, and then that creates a sense of safety. It's that easy. So simple. It's magical. It's so simple that it's magical.
Yeah. And sometimes we just walk beyond the simple because it seems too easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also found that that's an important part, is to build up confidence enough in oneself to move into the uncomfortable spaces and emotions and thoughts, and then move back into that comfort, and then slowly get intimate with the trigger, with discomfort, with uncertainty. Yeah. Oh, so good. Your work is so great. So one more thing that Rosemary does is Vedic astrology. Can you tell our listeners what that is, how it's different, and how it informs your work?
For sure. Yeah. So I kind of went down that path. I was always into astrology, what we call Western astrology, like the kind widely used in the, Western world, especially I speak from the lens of the United States because that's where I live, but I think in Europe too, Western astrology, it's like Hellenistic astrology. And I was always into that, the whole like read your horoscope in the newspaper thing. I had the apps like my whole life. I had been into that. And then in my yoga teacher training, I discovered that there was such a thing as Vedic astrology. And from that moment, I was hooked on learning more. I got all these books, acquired all these, I was reading books, listening, just devouring all the resources I could. And so I think it comes from a desire to, the more you want to learn about yoga, the more you want to learn about like all of the pieces of yoga. And that includes Ayurveda. And for me, Jyotish, Vedic astrology, because I already was so interested in astrology. And I think it also comes from a desire to just, it kind of started out like I would see or theme my classes based on the seasons and the moon cycle. It makes it kind of easy to theme weekly classes because you're like, oh, what's going on in the cosmos right now? And that gives me some inspiration. So then I ended up getting a certification now in Vedic astrology. But so I'm kind of building, because I am in training to become a yoga therapist, but now I'm at the point in my training where I'm in practicum and I'm accepting clients. And I've already done the Vedic astrology certification. I think the two go hand in hand really well because, so first of all, people can do an astrology reading virtually. That's super easy. We just do it over Zoom, but yoga therapy can be done virtually. It's a lot more challenging. But the idea behind Vedic astrology is, and especially how it works well with yoga therapy, is because it's just a tool. It's a system. I like to say it's a system of archetypes to kind of, and they're always changing, and you can look at how these archetypes, like the planets and the signs and things, are relating to each other and what those symbols and archetypes mean. And then you can just say, hey, does that resonate in my life or does it not? And I'm a firm believer in astrology, but that kind of gets back to the whole research piece. A part of me like really wanted to like research and like prove it to be true and from a Western perspective, right? But then on the path, I've been letting go of that because I'm like, it doesn't really matter, first of all, if it's verifiable from a Western perspective. But then second of all, it's like the Vedas, that's another way of knowing, that whole oral tradition.
It's a science.
And it's still in a lot of ways, it's tried and tested in the same way our science is, right? But in my own life, I've seen it, and for other people, I've seen it to be a really valuable tool to get more in touch with it, living in alignment with seasons and with the patterns and the cycles of life. And it's a valuable tool, in my opinion, for svadhyaya, for self-study.
Yes.
So that's ultimately how I use it in conjunction with yoga therapy, is just an extra tool in the toolbox to help people better get to know themselves, better get to know their karmas and their dharma, right? Like where'd you come from? Where are you going? Feel more at home with those things. Yeah.
The self-knowledge is so important because that also makes you feel safe. Yeah. Are people open to this? Do you suggest it, or it's only when they ask for it?
It's kind of, people tend to seek me out for one or the other.
Okay.
Nowadays. But I do think I'm still early in the process, right? Like I'm just barely building a yoga therapy practice. So I think I'm excited to see how it will evolve. I have big plans for how I'm going to integrate them, but also a part of me is like, I'm not going to subject everybody to astrology if that's not their thing. I'm not trying to be dogmatic about it and shove it down anybody's throats or whatever.
But does it help you as a therapist? So when someone comes in and you understand which date of birth they are and certain things, do you check out for yourself how that could help or inform what practices you give them?
Totally.
Yeah.
It helps, because you can also see the elements from somebody's birth chart. You can see a little bit doshas, like somebody's type,
the gunas,
right? Their Ayurvedic type. You can see those things from the chart, and additionally, like I would never look it up without somebody's permission. I wouldn't just do it behind somebody's back. So when it is a part of the session, when it is a part of the practice, it gives us a container to it's kind of like meditation, where you're separating yourself from the emotion or from
that you're observing,
from the thing, and it gives like the archetypes of the planets and signs. It gives a way to separate yourself and then put language to some experiences. And it's also a wonderful tool for motivational interviewing. Like I can ask people, this is what I see in your chart. Does this resonate with you? Yes or no? And then it's like, but if not, then what does? Like, things like that.
Life purpose and meaning.
Exactly. That's mostly, and that's another, a good point too. The differences between Western and Vedic astrology is Vedic astrology has a lot of emphasis on your karma. They say like past life karma and this, so things that you maybe have experienced in past lives, whether you subscribe to that theory or not, it's like, maybe what things are you already good at? What things are you here in this life to work with? What has been your dharma, right?
Your strengths, and I weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Exactly.
Your squats.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it provides a nice container to allow a person to be like, well, I'm separating myself from that because this is just what my chart says, right? So we're just going to talk about what the chart says.
Yes, it becomes objective.
Exactly. And which is a valuable tool.
Yeah. Yeah, because then it's not so personal.
Yeah. So I've seen it really resonate for people. And then there's this culture around it that less about like, this is in my birth chart, so this is why I am this way. It's like, I've been through this stuff in my life and this is what I'm working. This is kind of the hand I've been dealt. And then we have lots of tools, mainly from yoga. And that's where the yoga therapy piece comes in well, because just from studying yoga therapy, I have all these more tools in my toolbox to help people deal with their karmas, their stuff, right? Yeah. They're like, well, it's like, if these are the things you're hearing, these are your struggles. Here are some tools from yoga, whether that be postures, mantras, meditation, whatever, all of the tools that I can then give a person based on our so an astrology reading is different than a yoga therapy assessment, but the outcome can be a lot similar, I think.
Yes, definitely. You're probably working more with psyche and mind.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Which has always been a focus for me anyway, especially with the trauma, it's like maybe one day I'll get an advanced degree in psychology, but now I'm focusing on astrology. And
I know what you mean. I'm also contemplating this. Yeah. I want to get a degree in psychology right now.
Yeah.
So totally. Okay. Hey, thank you for all of this. Is there a practice you want to guide us through? Or is there anything else you still want to tell us? Something you feel we haven't touched on?
No, I think there's a lot of stuff I could talk all day about. Is my jam, but yeah, a lot of good stuff. Yeah. Thanks much for having me, for sure.
Yeah.
But a practice. Yeah. So I could totally lead a little 5-minute or so guided meditation. I'm happy to do that. But I'm also happy to explain the kind of background.
Please do.
Behind the meditation and why I think this particular one works so well. So I teach this or some version of this to almost all of my students. Like this is the most, like in my yoga classes, in my group classes, I say the 3 words base, breath, and intention repeatedly because I'm trying to condition people to check in with, are they grounded? Are they breathing? Are they living in alignment with their goals, right? Are they embodying who they hope to be in life? And so I kind of boil it down to those 3 words. And I say that repeatedly to my students. And I'm like, if I ask you here to check in enough with that, maybe you'll start doing it off your mat too. But so that's just even in a general public class. But from a trauma-informed perspective, it's basically a meditation the object of the meditation is basically the 5 senses. And what that does is it allows a person to get really in touch with their body. And especially so, and that's another thing is I always invite people to close their eyes or keep them open because closing your eyes, even for me, sometimes I'm like, it feels like work to close my eyes. I'd rather keep them open, and that's fine. We should all give ourselves permission to do that. But when you're turning your awareness more internally and you start to get really in touch with that sensate awareness, that sensory information that's coming in all the time, and we interpret that usually through our visual sense. We're like, okay, I see all this stuff, and that's what kind of makes the forefront of our awareness. But the more we get in touch with how our body is constantly taking in all this information and how that affects us. So that's another thing. This is like kind of weird for me to lead virtually. I usually lead it in person so that I can give examples for people and I can control the environment and know that they're in a serene-ish environment, right? But the idea is you can also take this out of the meditation practice and you can do it in a busy city and get in touch with how your environment can make you feel overwhelmed. And if you do feel overwhelmed, you can come down to breaking it down to the 5 senses and kind of get in touch with the energies. That's what it at least feels like, is the energies around you. It's pretty wild. So you get the idea behind it.
Yeah, I don't think it's so wild. I think you're totally spot on. Yeah. And it's true. Once you get into your senses and into your body, and it becomes, like you say, conditioned, or you're trained in that. It's much easier to do that when you're bombarded by the busyness of daily life, to check in at least with yourself.
Yeah. But so then I also love to tell people to come back to their sensations and their breath, specifically because I get a lot of people, and especially people with anxiety or something, they're like, I can't meditate because I can't concentrate, or it doesn't feel right to sit still. And it's like, well, the idea isn't to stop thinking. I think a lot of people think that the idea of meditation is to not think, to clear the mind, right? But I always like to tell people, like, no, it's maybe eventually you'll get there, or you'll get glimpses of it where you're not feeling pulled in a million directions.
You'll get it for a second in 10 days. Yeah.
So here's the practice. And I first want to start with the disclaimer that if you're like me and you listen to podcasts while you're driving, please don't close your eyes. So if you want to come back to this, please come back to it at a time when you can, be still, maybe close your eyes. But if you're ready and you're in a comfortable position, I encourage you to do it. If sitting is comfortable for you, that's fine. If not, laying down is great too. The idea is to be extremely comfortable and cultivate the most ease in your body. So go ahead and get comfortable. And then if it feels all right for you to close your eyes, I invite you to do so. But sometimes that can feel like more work. So feel free to open your eyes or just kind of soften your gaze, as long as you turn your awareness inwards. And then first, we'll begin by noticing our breath. So before you try to control or change your breathing. Just notice its natural state and start to tap into how your breath is impacted by your activities. So depending on what you were doing before this, maybe you had a lot of caffeine, or you were sitting in traffic, or you were coming from a busy day at work, or otherwise are experiencing stress, could be chronic. Maybe your breath is a little bit quickened, choppy, in the chest, uneven. That's all right. Maybe you did a yoga practice, or had a nice relaxing time before class and your breath is already smooth and even and slow. There's no right or wrong answers. There's just awareness. We just want to cultivate awareness and maybe start to put the pieces together of how the activities and physiology are linked. And then when you feel ready, we do want to cultivate belly breathing. So with an inhale, you'll expand your belly button outwards from your spine. Maybe even your entire belly expands outward to give your lungs more space, your diaphragm more space to expand down and take in more air. And then with your exhales, you'll press your belly in towards your spine to squeeze out all the old stale air. And so when you do that, you're giving your body more space to take in and squeeze out air. And you're also able to slow down the breath that way. So we want to slow down the breath to your comfortable maximum breath. And when I say comfortable maximum, I mean you want to breathe as deeply as possible without feeling like you're holding or gripping. So inhale as deeply as possible. And then maybe you exhale for just a beat longer to create more space, to take in more air, and to slow down the body, slow down the heart rate, slow down the mind. And we'll continue that comfortable maximum deep belly breathing for the duration of this meditation. And if your mind starts to wander, as it will, as its job to do, you can always come back to that belly breathing in and out through the belly, maybe even extending the exhales just a beat longer than the inhales. And then next, I'll ask you to turn your awareness to your base. And so that's any point of contact with the support below you. It could be your feet and your seat. It could be your hands resting on your lap, or it could be the backside of your body if you're laying down. Whatever it is for you, anywhere that gravity is acting, check in there. Check in with the sensations at your base. And notice, ask yourself if you feel grounded. And now, it's okay if you do or you don't feel grounded. Just start to ask yourself what sensations are letting you know, one way or the other. Is there anything perhaps you're holding on to that you could exhale and release to cultivate a deeper sense of groundedness, a sense of heaviness through the bones and lightness through the flesh? With each inhale, inhaling up more of that groundedness from your base and exhaling to soften deeper into groundedness. And next, we'll turn our awareness to our other physical sensations of touch. So you might do a quick body scan, or you might just notice the feeling of your clothes on your skin or the air on your skin. Maybe if you can feel temperature differences throughout your body, or pain or discomfort or ease or tension, comfort. Just notice all the physical sensations of touch on your body. Maybe you even notice the sensations of your breath, of your belly moving in and out, or bring the awareness back there. If you had lost your belly breathing, maybe you can even turn into such a subtle sensation of the air moving across your nose or across the upper lip, in and out of your nose. Maybe you notice a temperature difference there. And then next, we turn our awareness to your sense of sound. And so surely you can hear the sound of my voice and what direction that's coming from. And maybe you can hear any other sounds going on around you, whether your environment is more noisy or more quiet. Maybe you can tap into kind of the big energy of the sounds that you hear, and then tap into the more subtle nuances of the sounds and just get really oriented to your surroundings only through your sense of sound. So maybe you can notice the direction things are coming from, loud noises, soft noises, near noises, distant noises. Maybe you can even hear your breath and come back to your breath. And then next we turn our awareness to our sense of smell and taste. We do those two together because they're so interrelated. Maybe you notice if you have a taste in your mouth or if your mouth feels dry or not. It's okay. No right or wrong answers, just awareness. Maybe you notice any smells of maybe yourself or any personal care products you use. Maybe you notice any smells of your surroundings, the building you're in, the room you're in, or if you're outside, maybe the air around you is so fresh that you don't even notice the smell. There's no right or wrong answers. We're just cultivating awareness. And then we'll come back to the breath and take 3 rounds of your comfortable maximum breath, just turning that awareness back to the breath, back to the sensations of the breath. And then finally, before opening your eyes or before looking around, if your eyes are already open, please just take in the big experience of your sensate awareness of all of those senses we just checked in with, and see how in tune with your environment you can get through your sense of sound, your sense of touch, your sense of even temperature on your skin. If your eyes are closed, maybe you can notice the sense of light and dark in the room. We do have photoreceptors on our skin. Our skin can sense this stuff. Our brain is always taking in this information. And just see how oriented you can get with your surroundings, the energy of what's around you. And when you feel ready, you can flutter your eyes open and take in those surroundings that you were just getting in touch with.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was so lovely. I really enjoyed the breathing in and up, the groundedness, and really sensing the world through the senses. Because, I mean, we do it, but then let it be informational and relational. That was really good.
Totally.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Very, very satisfying and solid.
Good. I'm glad. And my intention is always that it helps connect to how we're always taking in all of that information, you know, and we can slow down and feel safe in it and feel more aware of it anytime. We don't just have to be sitting in meditation. You can do it quickly when you're feeling stressed or whatever.
Yeah, well, this was the other thing. It was very fast. It was very short, but strong.
Yeah. I was trying to keep it brief for the purpose of the podcast, but, you know, if I can do it longer, and I have done, you know, it can be up to 20 minutes because we can keep coming back to the breath. Or if people want to take that and kind of practice it on their own, all you have to remember is comfortable maximum breath and the 5 senses. And you just keep coming
moving
back
in
to
and
the
out.
macro and the micro, and just use that as an object of meditation for however long you want to meditate for.
Yep. Wonderful. So thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for your wonderful work and everything that you're doing and what you've shared with us today. So do you want to tell our listeners anything else? Is there something you'd like to leave them with? Even just about your work, if people want to work with you or know more about you, your website.
Well, first I want to say back at you, thanks for creating this container and thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
And then if people want to work with me, they can find me through my website, yogiscopes.com. You can find all my things out. You can email me. I have an astrology blog. You can find my social media. I'm always open to connecting to people. Like, I'm a real person. Please just like send me an email or a message. Like, I'd love to hear from anybody. Or if anybody wants an astrology reading, if that piques some interest, you can schedule yourself right there. I do sliding scale pricing to try to be a little more accessible for folks. So just look on there for that, and then be on the lookout for, I'm creating something soon to offer yoga therapy and retreats. I don't want to say too much, but for people that want to come from afar for yoga therapy.
Oh, great.
Be on the lookout. I'm happy to connect, though. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
For sure. And I'll be on the lookout for your book.
You'll hear about it.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say goodbye to our listeners, and we'll see and hear from each other. And bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
So thank you everyone for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.